The incident command system is usually thought of as a tool for responding to hurricanes and terrorist attacks and huge wildland fires, and it's rarely on the minds of most rescuers who are helping people in the mountains. But I think it should be, because I believe the key principles of the incident command system can make all of us better rescuers. I'm going to review a few of the key principles of the incident command system and consider how you can use those principles to improve mission execution. I'll start off discussing conceptual foundational stuff, but bear with me because I'll finish with relevant examples and ideas on how you can improve your rescues. I'll focus on ski and mountain rescue because that's where my background is. But these concepts can be applied to small team rescues in the front country as well. And if you work in a hospital or clinic that deals with emergencies, you'll probably see how some of these same concepts can carry over. First, I'll introduce myself. I'm Andy Rich. I am the program coordinator for remote rescue training at the University of Utah. I'm a full-time rescue educator, and I'm also the chair of the WMS Diploma in Mountain Medicine Committee. I'd also like to note Steve Akalis, who helped in making this presentation. Steve is an instructor of remote rescue at the University of Utah, and he also is the former commander of the Salt Lake County Search and Rescue Team. So think of a rescue or a medical call, something you were involved in where a group of people had to accomplish something important in a short amount of time, something urgent. What themes repeatedly came up during the debriefing? What were the challenges? What goes wrong when responding to an emergency? Yeah, you probably thought communication or leadership, and those are the common themes. It's pretty much a given that people who have worked in emergency situations will say there were communication or leadership problems. Communication problems often come as a result of information not being compartmentalized or filtered correctly. People don't get the information they need, or they get a lot of information that's not relevant to them. Likewise, when we look at leadership problems, we find they're often caused by too little or too much. Too little leadership can be the result of not having a leader at all, or having a leader who just doesn't lead. And too much leadership can result from having too many leaders, or by having a leader who micromanages his team. It shouldn't be surprising that we often find many communication problems are frequently the result of leadership problems. So what is the incident command system? Well, it's an organizational management system. It's designed to manage people, responsibilities, communication, and resources. And it's designed to be temporary. The management system, the organizational hierarchy, is designed so that it can be created quickly during an emergency, scaled to the appropriate size, and disbanded when it's no longer needed. The incident command system is definitely able to handle large and complex incidents. Think 9/11 or hurricane or wildfire. And it's designed to handle incidents that span multiple jurisdictions and multiple agencies responding. However, as we'll see, the core ICS principles can provide significant benefits on smaller missions. So why do folks use the ICS? Well, yeah, it allows us to clarify who does what, and it's designed to improve communication and reduce leadership problems by clarifying responsibilities, which improve communication, and it allows us to focus on our objectives. So I'll give a brief review of the ICS organizational structure, and don't worry, we're not going to go too far into this. The organizational structure looks something like this. At the top of the chart is the incident commander who supervises up to 4 sections. As rescuers, we live within the operations section. And FEMA tells us that the operations section develops and implements the strategies and tactics to accomplish the objectives. That's FEMA speak for they get stuff done. Today, we're going to focus exclusively on the operations section, although these key principles apply to the other sections as well. Inside the operations section, we have branches and groups and units, which have teams, which have resources, and it ends up looking something like this. I expect that many of you have taken an online ICS course, but I'll bet that most of you couldn't tell me the difference between a branch or a group or a unit or a strike team and a task force. And yeah, I'm sure some of you could. The formal ICS terminology is very helpful in larger missions, especially multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency missions. But I find that jargon can get in the way of small teams adopting the ICS. So although standardized terminology is important, I'm going to minimize the ICS jargon today and focus on the ICS principles that can help us improve our missions. So we're going to focus on these two key ICS principles. And this is pretty much the extent of the ICS jargon in today's talk. We're going to look at how these two principles, the chain of command and span of control, can help us improve communication and reduce chaos in small team rescues. Let's first look at the chain of command. This concept really overlaps the ICS principle unity of command, but today I'm not going to differentiate between those two. So the chain of command has three concepts. First, everyone receives instruction from only one supervisor, one person, and that should be the supervisor designated through the temporary structure of the ICS. All of you have probably been in a work environment or on a rescue where multiple people are telling you what to do. Or maybe you've been in a situation where your boss's boss is telling you what to do. And at best, that leads to confusion and frustration, but it's just as likely to result in inefficiency and critical errors. The bottom line is everyone should have one and only one supervisor. Next, you should perform your assignment. Do your job. What do we call it when someone does something other than their assignment? Yeah, that's freelancing. And if we're all out there doing what we think needs to be done, we're all freelancing. And that's the antithesis of the incident command system. It's everyone's on their own rather than let's get this done as a team. Freelancing is much more likely to create gaps where things don't get done and overlaps where too many people are doing the same task. The third concept in the chain of command is to report back to your supervisor, back to the person who gave you the assignment. If you're trying to improve communication by being intentional, then there's really only a few reasons to report back to your supervisor. One, I completed my task, right? I did my job. Two, I need more resources. Three, this job just cannot be done. Or four, push or pull status updates, right? And we do find that in small team rescues, there's more of a dialogue, more of those status updates and discussion, and that can be helpful, but it's easy to overdo. So it's worth keeping these things in mind. And that's it. That's the chain of command. You receive instructions from one supervisor, you do your job, and you report back. That's the proverbial chain. That's the essence of the incident command system. And that's why the ICS is shown as an organizational chart, to clarify who reports to whom and who's responsible for what. And if this sounds easy, just three things, it's because conceptually it is, of course. But unfortunately, this is rarely what happens in our small team rescues. If your team can create a culture where these three things take place, you will undeniably reduce communication and leadership problems and ultimately make your rescues run more smoothly. So what does a team leader do? Yeah, they obviously make assignments and track their completion, sure, and the assignments should be clear, and the person receiving the assignment needs to know that they should report back to you. And these two things, clear assignments and knowing that they should report back to you, are necessary to maintain the chain of command. Another key responsibility of a rescue leader is to see the big picture, to think ahead. What needs to happen next? A good leader needs to anticipate what needs to be done next. It's easy to see what's happening now. We're putting on oxygen, we're packaging the patient. And everyone should be thinking ahead in regards to their particular responsibilities or tasks. But someone needs to step back and think about what nobody is yet responsible for. Maybe that means considering whether you should lower a patient over a cliff or do a long carryout. Maybe it means considering how the weather will affect an air ambulance, or how you're going to hydrate the rescuers, or the changing avalanche hazard, or a myriad of other conditions that someone needs to consider. The point is, someone needs to see the big picture and think ahead. I know what we're doing now, but what needs to be done next? And by seeing the big picture and making and tracking assignments, a leader can minimize gaps and overlaps where things don't get done or too many people are doing the same task. If people are reporting to you, then you're in a position of leadership, and all these jobs fall to you. A leader's ability to see the big picture leads to this concept of need to know. And because no one needs to know everything during a mission, well, except during really very small and very routine missions. If you're in a supervisory role, let your people do their jobs. A leader doesn't need to know the oxygen flow rate, or that a strap broke on the litter, or how rescuers are going to build a snow anchor. Trust the people who report to you to do their jobs. Don't micromanage them. And if you've been given an assignment, do your job and let your supervisor do hers. For example, if you're working on setting up the oxygen tank, or packaging a patient, or building a snow anchor, you don't need to know everything your supervisor knows. Trust the person you report to do his or her job. It's worth remembering that everyone in the ICS has a supervisor, except the incident commander, who's at the very top of the org chart. You know, people often talk about being a good leader and developing their leadership skills, but it's harder for some people to be a good follower than to be a good leader. Some of you probably know who you are. Developing good followership skills, is just as important as developing good leadership skills. When we look at the incident command system and the org chart, we can see that one of the purposes of the ICS, the organizational structure and chain of command and span of control, is to ensure success by clarifying and compartmentalizing everyone's roles and responsibilities and what they need to know. So let's explore how we can establish the chain of command in our small teams. First, we want to establish it early. Although it may feel difficult or unnecessary when your team is small and the mission is simple, it'll be much harder if you wait until the mission grows large and complex and you already have communication and leadership problems. It's also important to make sure the command structure, who reports to whom, is clear. Leadership is frequently established informally, simply because someone starts acting like a leader and everyone follows. And although that can work, it's much better if leadership is established explicitly. Some teams will already have a predefined ICS structure. That's usually the case with fire and law enforcement and some search and rescue teams. Other organizations like ski patrols have leadership structure, but often it's designed for daily operations rather than emergencies. And that's appropriate, as long as they can create a temporary organizational structure during rescues that supersedes the daily regular command structure. If you're working with radios, it's appropriate to say something like, "Attention all rescuers, Andy's the rescue team leader." Now, we're strong proponents of rescuers using this sentence when they arrive on scene to help establish a leadership structure. Who's in charge and how can I help? By saying this, you're reminding everyone the importance of having a leadership structure. Oh yeah, we probably should identify a leader. And second, you're showing that you're willing to work within that structure. Saying the sentence is the opposite of freelancing. You're showing you're a team player and you want the mission to succeed. Who is in charge and how can I help? So that was the principle of chain of command. The next ICS principle we want to discuss is the span of control. In ICS jargon, Span of control refers to the number of people who report to any one supervisor. Now, FEMA says 3 to 7 people with a ratio of 1 supervisor to 5 people recommended. And we're going to consider the appropriate number of people when we look at implementing the ICS in small teams. For now, I'll postpone that discussion. But when we talk about limiting the number of people, what we really should be considering is the amount of information the supervisor needs to keep track of. One way to do that is to delegate responsibilities rather than assign tasks. For example, in a Swiftwater mission, the leader could assign a task by asking 4 people to go downstream with throw bags to back up the rescuers. Or the leader could delegate a responsibility, maybe say, Sarah, you're in charge of downstream safety. Take these 3 people and they'll report to you. Now, in both cases, it may be that 4 people go downstream and stand on the river with the riverbanks with throw bags. But by assigning the responsibility for downstream safety, Sarah might choose that they should set up a diagonal grab line across the river instead, or that there should be an upstream lookout with a whistle, or decide where to position the rescuers. By assigning this as a responsibility, the leader not only improves his span of control by limiting the number of people reporting to him, he's also limited what he needs to know. He doesn't need to know the details. He only needs to know that Sarah is taking care of downriver safety. This lets the leader think ahead and see the big picture, and it provides Sarah the authority to do the job right. It's a win-win-win. It's also important to delegate leadership tasks early before you have too many direct reports. As soon as you can delegate responsibility, do it. So we've discussed using the chain of command in small team rescues. Now let's look at how we might use the span of control principle in small team rescues. Why do we want to limit the span of control? Yeah, because it's difficult to communicate with a large number of people and hard to keep track of what all those people are doing, right? And many communication and leadership problems are caused by too many people reporting to one person. So the question becomes, what's the appropriate number of people to report to one person? And FEMA says 3 to 7, 5 is recommended. And that's a reasonable starting point, but I would say it depends. It depends on whether they're doing similar tasks, and it depends on how complex the tasks are, and it depends on how difficult it will be to supervise them. If we consider the appropriate span of control for a typical ski patrol, for daily operations, we see the tasks are somewhat varied, but importantly, they're fairly routine. Sweep and setting up rope lines and providing medical care and doing avalanche mitigation, and they're in a familiar, confined geographic area with proven radio comms. During a normal workday, it might not be unreasonable for 20 or more patrollers to report to one supervisor. Of course, if you have a lift derailment or your cafeteria catches on fire, nobody can manage 20 people during an emergency, and you'll need something like the ICS to create a more appropriate temporary organizational structure. So what's the appropriate span of control for a probe line search? Now they're doing identical tasks, and the task is simple. It might not be routine, but sticking a probe in the snow is not complicated. And they're easy to supervise. The leader is standing right in front of them. So for a probe line, we usually recommend 10 to 1. 10 probers to 1 leader. For a probe line, that's the appropriate span of control. However, if we consider the appropriate span of control for the incident commander for a big, complex backcountry rescue, it's much different. This mission had more than 60 responders from a dozen agencies. There were searchers and canine teams and safety officers and helicopter crews and people delivering food and people dealing with media. In a mission like this, where people are doing very different tasks, and many of the tasks are complex, and the responders are located in a large geographic area and come from several different agencies, The appropriate number of people to report to the incident commander might be 2, 3, or 4 at the very most. Maybe one person in charge of operations in the mountains and field, and one person in charge of operations in the base area. And maybe each of those people would only have 3 or 4 people reporting to them. Regardless of the type of rescue, whether it's rock or snow or an aviation accident, these are the 3 important considerations when deciding the appropriate span of control. And that's it. Those are the 2 key principles of the incident command system that we'll be exploring in this presentation. The chain of command means you get assignments from one supervisor, you do your job, and you report back. Span of control means you should limit the number of people who report to any one person. And now we're going to look at how we can apply these principles to small team rescues. Let's consider a side country avalanche. This is a real side country avalanche incident with 20 to 30 responders from several different agencies. And a response like this isn't uncommon near a ski area. In this case, there were plenty of skilled rescuers, skilled people, and there were a lot of people doing good work. But there was no formal leadership structure. When patrollers arrived from different ski areas and when search and rescue folks arrived, nobody organized the rescuers into a clear hierarchical structure. Was there a chain of command? Nope. Everyone was basically freelancing. And that's not to criticize them. They're doing good work. But do you think there were gaps and overlaps? Where stuff wasn't getting done or too many people are doing the same task? Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there'll be communication problems? Undeniably. There are a lot of different ways you can create an organization at an avalanche rescue, and that's not the point of this presentation. The point is you need to be able to create an organizational structure during an emergency. In this case, we've implemented the 3 principles. The chain of command. We've implemented the chain of command. Everyone receives instructions from one person. They can do their job, and they know who they should report back to. The leader saw that she had 2 dog teams and assigned one of them to be responsible for the canine searching. That person is probably still hands-on, still working a dog, but they now have responsibility for the canine search. Similarly, the leader delegated responsibility for all probe searching and all transportation and other tasks. The point isn't how the leader distributed responsibility. The point is that she did. The leader also limited her span of control by distributing responsibilities to multiple supervisors, multiple leaders. Each of these supervisors has an appropriate number of people reporting to them. And this structure limits the amount of information anyone needs to know. The rescue leader doesn't need to know where the dogs have searched, and those canine searchers don't need to know the plans for toboggan transportation. Each leader is responsible for the chain of command and span of control within their assigned area. Does having an organizational structure minimize gaps and overlaps? Yeah, absolutely. And without leadership, each one of these dog teams or the spot probers, each person will undoubtedly search the same high probability areas and fail to search low probability areas. We've seen this repeatedly. And you can't blame them. Having someone in charge of the canine search team or in charge of the probers minimizes that. Do you think this would improve communication as well? Absolutely. And reduce chaos? Sure, yeah, of course. That's not to say there won't be communication or leadership challenges. Some level of chaos is inherent in most rescue situations when an organizational structure is built on the fly. Our goal, and the goal of the incident command system, is to minimize that confusion. And creating this organizational structure didn't require any additional people. Now, I'm obviously adamant about having that organizational structure and about the chain of command and receiving instructions and reporting through that chain. But that doesn't mean you can't talk to people who aren't in your chain, right? we actually encourage this horizontal communication. Maybe a dog team will suggest that you spot probe where a dog indicated, or you borrow probes from another team, or ask someone if there's a cornice below you, or ask about snow stability, or get help loading a patient, or ask for an opinion on an anchor, whatever. These are all great helpful communications, and they can help complete our common objectives. However, we do have a few caveats to horizontal communications. First, they shouldn't interfere with you completing your assignment, and they also shouldn't interfere with others completing their assignments. Along with that, horizontal comms should not be used to make assignments. Assignments need to go through the chain of command. And you need to keep your supervisors informed. It's challenging to be an effective leader when the ground is shifting under your feet and you aren't aware of it. Okay, so that avalanche mission had 20 to 30 people. The need for an organizational structure was pretty obvious, I think. Now, let's consider a typical low-angle rope rescue with about 10 rescuers. Maybe a fallen climber that requires several rope lengths of low-angle lowering to get them to a trail. Without a formal leader, you might have half a dozen litter attendants, maybe a medical provider, and a couple of people setting up the first belay station and a couple of people setting up the next belay station. Setting up 2 belay stations is a fairly common approach, so you can leapfrog belay stations without having to tear down one before you can set up the next. Now, if you've done a lot of these and you're working with your SAR team, you might not need to assign a leader, and this will work. And certainly, if you had more people, 4 more in this case, in the blue boxes, it would be nice to have an organizational structure that looks more like this. You'd have someone in charge of the mission, you'd have someone in charge of the litter attendants, and maybe a formal safety officer, and someone in charge of rigging. And that would definitely improve communication, reduce confusion, and minimize errors. No doubt about it. But there was a cost in that example. We needed 4 more people. So what if we didn't have additional resources to fill out the ICS tree? Well, in this tree, we've removed the 4 people that we previously added, but we kept the organizational structure. We continue to have distributed responsibility, and we've retained the chain of command and span of control. We did this by having the leaders become hands-on. In this case, we have someone in charge of the litter attendants, but they're also an attendant. And we have someone in charge of medical, but they're also helping with the litter. And we have a dedicated mission leader, but that person is also serving as a safety officer. By doing this, we've reinforced the chain of command, and we've limited the span of control, and there wasn't any cost to implementing it. Will this result in fewer communication and leadership problems than the original structure? Yeah. Absolutely. In small teams rescues, it's hard for a leader to be hands-off. We don't often have enough people, but as much as possible, supervisors should minimize the tasks that they themselves are involved in. A leader who ends up being hands-on during a rescue really has 3 choices. First, they can continue to be hands-on, and that's often the case when there just aren't enough rescuers. And in this case, they should try to do less consuming tasks, right? That means both time-consuming as well as mentally taxing tasks. It's hard to see the big picture, think ahead, and see the next step if you're heavily involved in an operational task, for example, patient care. Or the leader can transfer his operational tasks so that he can focus on the bigger picture, focus on the leadership piece. And lastly, another option is to transfer leadership responsibilities. And that's a reasonable option. Our only words of advice are that the new leader needs to be briefed on the status of the mission. Briefing the new leader is critical to the ICS. And everyone needs to know when leadership transfers. Attention all rescuers, Steve is now the rescue team leader. The point is that in small team rescue, you might not have the luxury of being hands-off, but you do your best to manage it if you have to be hands-on. Okay, finally, let's look at an inbounds ski patrol response with roughly 5 rescuers. Let's say you're called to 1050, an accident at a ski area. The first patroller arrives, that's Carol. What should she do? Yeah, she should do a scene size up. She begins to develop her rescue awareness. And what does that involve? She tries to figure out what's the situation. And from what she knows, which isn't much at this point, what are the possible solutions and how might she execute it? Then she'll begin the medical assessment and she'll call for some resources. Second patroller arrives on scene, that'd be me. What should I do? Yeah, I'm going to ensure that the leadership is established and begin to grow that ICS tree. And so I'm going to say, how can I help? And, or I might say, do you want to be the leader? And she'll say, no, I've already made patient contact. Why don't you take it? You can go either way, no matter. That's what she's chosen. Fine, I'll be the team leader. This is Andy. I'll be in charge of this incident. Carol, you're in charge of medical. I'd ask her, what do you have? And we'd talk about it. We have a 32-year-old patient, possible femur fracture, patient's currently stable. We need a toboggan, a traction splint, oxygen, and 3 additional patrollers. And let's roll ACS air, ALS air. Yeah, okay, fine. As additional patrollers arrive, they should ask this question. Yeah, who's in charge and how can I help? It reinforces the ICS principles. It helps get or keep the mission on the right foot. And I make assignments as other patrollers arrive, right? Take over traffic control, which I was doing. I was hands-on, but as somebody else arrives, it's appropriate for me to delegate that. If somebody help with medical, take care of transportation, setting up the landing zone. All those need to get taken care of. And will this leader need to be hands-on? Absolutely, obviously. But he needs to be strategic in which tasks he takes on. You want me to set up oxygen? Sure. Help load the patient? You bet. Take over medical? No way. By limiting hands-on tasks, the leader can see the big picture and think ahead to the next steps. Maybe the accident involved a snowmaking gun and the investigation needs to be started. Maybe the weather's changing and ALS ground should also be called. Maybe he should check in with his team and make sure they have what they need. And maybe we should try to contact the family. The point isn't the specifics of what he should be considering. The point is that someone needs to see the big picture, think ahead, and help maximize the effectiveness of the response. And preferably, every mission should include a debriefing. For most missions, we simply ask, what did we do well? What could we have done better? And how can we improve? If you're in a leadership position, we find that speaking up about what others did well and what you could have done better is a great way to create a culture focused on improvement rather than a culture based on blame and fame. The bottom line is let's turn every mission, even the small ones, into learning opportunities. Now, this graph shows the relationship between the benefits of using the ICS and the mission's complexity. Now, it's obvious that in big, complex missions, the ICS is very beneficial. You can't have 1,000 people fighting a wildland fire without a clear organizational structure. We looked at using the ICS principles in an avalanche with 20 to 30 rescuers, and there was a pretty clear need for using the ICS principles in that mission. And we looked at a low angle rescue with roughly 10 rescuers, and ICS might not have felt as necessary, but there was definitely benefit. And we looked at the ski patrol response with only 5 rescuers. And ICS wasn't necessary, but it still added benefit, and importantly, without any cost. We think rescuers often overlook the benefit of ICS on small, less complicated missions, those on the left side of this graph. And there isn't a cost to implement this. It should go without saying, But by using these ICS principles on every mission and every time you train, you'll be much better prepared for large, more complex missions, the missions that demand the organizational structure. So here's the quick summary. If you want to clarify responsibilities, improve communication, and reduce chaos, implement these 3 chain of command concepts. Get assignments from one person, complete your assignment, and report back to your supervisor. And that's it. That's the essence of the ICS. These are critical to implementing ICS in your small team rescues. Span of control refers to limiting the number of people who report to any one person. The appropriate number of people really does depend on the task they're doing, its complexity, and the ease of supervising. A good leader distributes rather than hoards responsibility. And the benefits should be pretty obvious. Implementing these principles will clarify responsibilities, improve communication, reduce chaos and confusion, and minimize the likelihood of errors and maximize the likelihood of success. You can begin to implement this in your small team rescues by being quick to ask this question in every mission. Who's in charge, and how can I help?